Try that.
How about now? Okay. Did anyone hear anything I said then? Should I repeat that?
Online, we just now hear you for the first time here.
Okay.
Sorry, guys.
That was just a test run to see if we can find the unmute button here in the hearing room. We don't want to get to. Okay, let's start this again. Let me use my gavel. Okay. Welcome to the Mineland Reclamation Board. This is a hybrid meeting on Wednesday, May 18th. As noted, clearly we have some people in the room and some people on screens. We do have 2 screens here in the room. See those of you on Zoom, and hopefully you can see us in the room. We have some division staff with us as well. Raise your hand. Raise your hand if you can't hear us, or if you would like to be heard. Send Cammie a chat if you feel like you've had your hand up and we haven't gotten your attention here. So with that, let's do a roll call, please. Mr. Singletary? Here. Ms. Duncan? Here. Ms. Nelson? Here. Mr. Mock?
Present.
Right. Mr. Lobato?
Here.
And Mr. Ortiz?
Here.
And my name is Nell Wareham. I'm the board chair right now. So let's do an approval of the April 2022 summary of minutes. So moved by Ms. Duncan. Second?
Second.
Mr. Singletary, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. April 2022 summary of minutes. We do not have any approval of the continuances or withdrawals to discuss today. And Mr. Mott, let's take it away with an executive director's office report and then a report by the division.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board, Director Brandon Tim Mock, Deputy Director for the Department of Natural Resources. My apologies that I'm not there in person. Woke up with a head cold, a little bit under the weather, and out of precaution, we'll be working remotely. Couple of updates here. One, the Colorado Geographic Naming Advisory Board, Governor Polis concurred with the Naming Advisory Board's recommendations, removing the term squaw from federal usage. The recommendations were submitted to the federal task force under the U.S. Geologic Survey for consideration. Their next meeting will be this Thursday, tomorrow, May 19th, 6 to 8 p.m. We had a couple of actually a pretty widely successful legislative session for the Department of Natural Resources. Let me work through a couple of these here. We received $8 million for Parks and Wildlife to advance the goals of the Future Generations Act, provide for additional outdoor recreation, support regional partnerships, and implement the recommendations from the Big Game Policy Report. Another $1 million to support wolf reintroduction and management activities. We also expanded the Habitat Partnership program, which helps landowners and wildlife officers reduce human-wildlife conflicts. $5 million is going to CDOT to be used in consultation with Parks and Wildlife for critical infrastructure for wildlife crossings. We got the biggest investment, $6 million in Species Conservation Trust Fund in over the last 6 years. $1 million to support backcountry search and rescue volunteers, including providing mental health programs. We reauthorized the non-game checkoff, which raises over $180,000 a year for the management of non-game species. $60 million was appropriated from the Economic Recovery and Relief Cash Fund to accelerate progress on meeting groundwater sustainability deadlines in the Rio Grande and Republican River basins. $20 million also from the fund to address the health of our watersheds and forests, to seize the unprecedented availability of federal funds through the bipartisan infrastructure bill for our forests and our watersheds. $2 million statewide program to support replacement of irrigated grass with water-wise landscaping. $800,000 to support new staffing between CWCB and DWR to provide regional support for the Wilder Plan grant program. $10 million to match dedicated local funds for wildfire mitigation and forest management. $5 million for improvements to the Colorado State Forest Service's tree nursery to help rebuild our forests. And then $7.2 million for in additional state wildfire mitigation programs, as well as we will be adding an assistant director for energy innovation in the executive director's office. A couple other things here. The Colorado Water Conservation Board is meeting yesterday and today. They're finalizing the Colorado Water Plan draft, which will be released for public comment on June 30th. And then recently, the Upper Colorado River Commission approved drought response operations agreement, which calls for 500,000 acre feet of water to be released from the Flaming Gorge Reservoir between May and April 2023 to protect elevations at Lake Powell. And then finally, Parks and Wildlife, the stakeholder advisory group working on wolf reintroduction. Their next meeting is in Woodland Park, May 25th to May 26th. And that concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Russ told me to come up here.
Okay,
That way
we've
they
got
can see you. Okay.
Director Brandon coming
Oh,
up here.
right over there.
Thank you, Mr. Mock.
Good morning, everybody, here in the room and virtually. Ginny Brandon, Division Director for Reclamation, Mining and Safety, and I just have a couple of quick updates. We are still waiting for guidance from the Office of Surface Mining on that infrastructure money we're getting for abandoned mines at coal sites. And, it's a lot. It's roughly anticipated to be about 10 million a year for 15 years. So that's going to give us a lot of leeway to do a lot of work on coal mine fires and closures. And really take a run at those coal mine fires, which are such a tough nut to crack. We managed to monitor and mitigate, but rarely ever extinguish. And so we are looking forward with great anticipation to OSM's guidance for us on the expenditures of those funds. And I want to, with a heavy heart, tell you that our longtime colleague, Bill Yorkburn, who is the Director of Mine Safety and Training, is retiring after, I think, about 30 years, Jeff? Yeah. And so we're sorry to see him go. He really led Colorado in terms of really having one of the strongest mine safety training programs in the country. And that's just not me talking. Other states will say the same thing. And so sorry to see him go, but Brandon Neal will step into his job. Brandon's been with the division forever. He did leave briefly to do a stint with the feds, but he came back, and they always come back. And so he's a veteran at it, and so we have every confidence that he will continue with Bill's legacy. That's all I have.
Any questions? Mr. Means? The updates or anything? No? Okay. All right, no other updates. We do not, I believe, have any items on number 4, nothing on the consent agenda. So moving along to the reason we are gathered here today, number 5 here. This is a formal public hearing, and this is for the rulemaking hearing pursuant to sections 34-32-106, parent 1, parent C, 34-32-108, parent 1, 34-32-110, parent 1, and 24-4-103 of the Colorado Revised Statutes. This is a promulgation of rules in the matter of amendments to the mineral rules and regulations of the Colorado Mineland Reclamation Board for hard rock, metal, and designated mining operations to CCR 407-1 regarding temporary cessation production and to address the requirements of House Bill 19-1113. The proposed regulations were filed electronically with the Secretary of State on March 15th, 2022 in compliance with statutory requirements. There was a published notice set on April 14th, 2022, and the deadline for receipt of requests for party status, comments, pre-hearing statements, and alternate proposed language. The board did receive 2 requests for party status. Written comments and alternate proposed language were timely received from Jennifer Thurston with Information Network for Responsible Mining, or INFORM, and Stan Dempsey with Colorado Mining Association, or CMA. Copies of the proposed rules as noticed, as well as the statement of basis, specific statutory authority and purpose are available to the audience. There was a pre-hearing conference that was held on April 26, 2022. Time was allotted to those with party status at the pre-hearing conference, which was outlined in the draft pre-hearing order. And to introduce the pre-hearing order, I would like to bring pre-hearing officer Jeff Graves up to present that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, board. Jeff Graves, serving as the pre-hearing conference officer for the pre-hearing conference rulemaking. And before you, you have the pre-hearing order that was developed pursuant to Rule 2.7 at the aforementioned pre-hearing conference that was held virtually on April 26th. We held that meeting with both the formal parties and the division. In that matter, at the pre-hearing conference, parties were informed of the rulemaking process before the board, and the draft pre-hearing order was developed with feedback from the parties and the division, and was revised subsequently after we received requests for non-parties to present before the board. So what you have before you is a revised draft pre-hearing order based on comments received. Does the board have any questions related to that draft pre-hearing order? Currently, we have the hearing set up such that HB 19-1113 and general edits will be considered on May 18th. And then on May 19th, consideration of rules and amendments pertaining to temporary cessation and production. I won't really go through the times allotted, but just recognize we did receive comments related to those times and the order of presentation. Any questions from the board?
Any discussion? The entertain a motion. Oh, wait, yep. We have Mr. Fugate coming up here.
Sorry, Madam Chair, Jeff Yates here representing the division. Just one request for a modification to allow some rebuttal time for the division, both the 18th and the 19th.
Absolutely.
Our preference would be that there's slots of time at the end of part of rebuttal and part of closing on both days, but it's up to board's discretion to from staff. We'll just be using that time for a rebuttal of proposals raised during the course of the hearing or to field board questions on the discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. We consider that an amendment. Yeah. Okay, so just a request for rebuttal from the divisions. Comment, is there a motion to approve? And then clarify what you're. That's okay.
I'll add on to it.
Okay.
So move that we accept the draft pre-hearing order as the final pre-hearing order with the amendment of the rebuttal time.
Second.
All those in favor, or any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Okay, hearing none, the motion passes with the amendment for division to have time for rebuttal on both days. Okay, so this time we're going to hand it over to our minerals program director, Russ Means.
Good morning, members of the board. Today we start this important final step in rulemaking. It's been an unusual path to get here, to say the least. You're all aware that we had some unforeseen delays, and the process has taken almost 2 years. Division would like to take this time to thank all the stakeholders in this process. Through their hard work, patience, and perseverance, we believe that the next 2 days are going to be productive and as streamlined as much as possible. The informal and formal processes have narrowed the gap on viewpoints and gained consensus where we can. The division feels that the proposed changes reflect all parties' concerns the best that we can, while making the rules workable for the board and the division in regulating the industry in a fair manner. For the record, all submitted written comments by non-parties, formal parties, including rebuttals and briefs, were forwarded to the board as part of the formal record for this process. We start today by discussing the changes in the rules to 1113, which encompasses the elimination of self-bonding and addresses the issues of potential for water treatment at a mine site. We will also be talking about general edits and editorial corrections that run throughout the rules. Tomorrow, we will discuss the definition of production and the relationship to temporary cessation. Our agenda is set up today through the pre-hearing order to allow for non-party public comment prior to the formal parties' presentations, your discussion, and your deliberations. Commenters are allotted 5 minutes apiece before we continue on with the formal party agenda. Staff will call upon the non-parties to speak and keep track of time to ensure that all parties are heard. Today, we have 8 parties that have requested time, so we will start that process and such here in a second. I will identify them and keep the time. We have a 9th request that that had a conflict, and they are actually going to be part of conservation's conversations and stuff tomorrow as a witness. So we removed her from this list of stuff today. So our first public comment is going to be Craig Howell. So Kenny will unmute Mr. Howell. Mr. Howell, you have 5 minutes, and I will keep time. I will let you know at 4 minutes when to start wrapping up.
And Mr. Means, before we get on to this first one, just from a process here, since these are non-party comments and not testimony, are we needing to swear anyone in, or can we just go speak freely on their comments? I just want to make sure I got this process.
That's this question. This is public comment, so.
So I don't just,
Yeah,
I don't need to do any swearing in, and so we've got that. Okay, sorry for that. I just wanted to make sure I had that process figured out.
Okay, we will start with Mr. Howell. Mr. Howell, can we hear you? I guess is the most important thing.
Okay, my name is Craig Howell. I'm in Natarita, Colorado. I'd like to just make a few brief comments on my thoughts on the designated mining operations and how it relates to production. I don't think that we can limit production to just an amount that is either brought out of the mine or put in a stockpile. To bring a mine into 21st century operations, there's too many activities to list. I'd just like to say that we need to keep in mind that this has worked forever. We shouldn't change it. We should support mining. Instead, you know, if we don't support mining here, then we're going to drive it somewhere else. I think we can do a good job, a responsible job, and do it in an environmentally friendly way. And that's really the gist of what I have to say. If you have any questions, I'll attempt to answer them. If anyone on the board or DRMS has a question, I'll attempt to answer it the best of my knowledge.
I don't see any questions, so I think that's great. Thank you very much for your comments.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Howell. Next on our list is Doug Pohl. And please forgive me if I mispronounce your last name and that, but Mr. Pohl, and that if Cammie can, we've got her unmuted. Mr. Pohl, can you hear us and can we hear you?
I can hear you just fine. And yes, you managed to pronounce it correctly. Not many people do. Good job on that.
All right, great. Thank you. You're on.
Thank you. Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Doug Pohl. I live in Canyon City, where we have a proposed gold mine that's up for consideration. My biggest concerns about this mine, and really any mine, are the impacts that it has on our water, on our outdoor tourism, and on the taxpayer cleanup that we would have to pay the cost for if operators skirt the responsibilities on reclamation. HB 119-1113 and the rule amendments proposed by the conservation groups address all these concerns, and I support them both. Regarding the House bill, the typical reclamation estimates on the front end of a mine proposal have historically underestimated the legacy and the cost to perpetually treat and maintain a draining mine, a draining audit or portal. This rule change would require any new mine to complete enough geotechnical investigation during the initial phases to determine and assure the MLRB and the state that a perpetually draining mine opening will not result as part of their proposed development, or that the draining mine discharge will not require perpetual treatment once the mining operation has been completed or the company walks away. I know some opponents of this rule change insist that it's essentially ending all future mining in Colorado, making it too difficult and costly to get a mine permitted in the state. And while I can see that it would require more upfront effort than operators might prefer to make, this bill, the purpose is simply to hold mine operators to an appropriate ecological standard and make them evaluate their actions more closely and create more accurate bonding estimates. These are reasonable and necessary requests, especially when we consider that there are over 200 known draining mines in the state already. We don't need to add more to the list. I believe this legislation would help mine operators be more accountable on the front end so that adequate reclamation is performed on the back end. I also support the rule amendments regarding temporary cessation. The existing loophole is a way for mining operators to stall through the cessation process and avoid implementing a reclamation plan. Stricter enforcement would compel those operators to continue mining or reclaim the mine per their established plan in a more timely manner. They've already committed to the reclamation plan. This rule just holds them to it. And just to put it on the record, I'm not against mining. I see it as an important industry that brings benefits for all of us. But I do believe that operators have an obligation to protect the quality and the quantity of our state's water resources. With water scarcity already a significant concern across the state and droves of new residents moving to Colorado each year, water is undoubtedly more precious than gold or any mineral. Thank you very much for your time. I urge you to please approve HB 191113 and the rule amendments for temporary cessation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions?
Mr. Paul, our next public commenter is Michael Gromowski. Mr. Gromowski, can you hear us? And I hope I pronounced your name right.
I can hear you just fine. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Your 5 minutes starts now.
Okay. Thank you for inviting my participation in the Mine Land Board rulemaking process. I feel this is crucially important given the potential for mines to adversely impact our environments and which are becoming more and more fragile each year. I support the adoption of the proposed draft rules for the implementation of House Bill 19-1113, and I support the amendments proposed by conservation groups. The bipartisan bill passed in 2019 intends to reduce the risks that hard rock mines pose to the environment and taxpayers. The legislation makes it far less likely that any future mines in Colorado will become perpetual polluters or mines that will require permanent water treatment systems. The bill states, and I quote, "Permit must demonstrate by substantial evidence a reasonably foreseeable end date for any water quality treatment necessary to ensure compliance with the water quality standards," unquote. The legislation is intended to prevent the release of toxic or acidic waters into the environment after mining operations are curtailed. Many of Colorado's streams and rivers are already degraded from the historic mining operations or from draining mines. In order to comply with the legislative requirements, the board and the division should develop formal guidance on how water quality should be determined and managed and that should be enforced through the permitting process. House Bill 1113 also mandates that the board and the division ensure the bond for each mining operation is sufficient to cover the foreseeable costs of protecting water quality and maintaining the treatment systems in the event the operator is unwilling or unable to do so. This strengthened mandate should help minimize situations where the public has to fund cleanup efforts. I also support the board's adoption of the amended rules for the temporary cessation of hard rock mines, and I support the amendments proposed by the conservation groups. The statute clearly requires that in no case may a mine delay final reclamation for a period of more than 10 years after ceasing production, without the permit terminating and final reclamation commencing. The regulations must reflect the legislative intent of that reclamation return the mine sites to wildlife habitat, grazing areas, or recreational opportunities for public lands. Finally, I'm also the chair of the Dawson Ranch Homeowners Association with about 480 homes and 1,000 residents. A bit over 2 years ago, we did a survey of the whole set of property owners, and we got an 86% response that told us that the people did not want any mines. The Dawson Mines portal would be only 1.4 miles west of the subdivision's western boundary and 1,000 feet above Great Creek that feeds the Arkansas River. The mine would likely be a perpetual polluter given the chemicals and the water content that occur in the wet mountains. We need rules that protect the water we drink and the environment we and close to 1 million tourists love. Loopholes that allow the mine to exist would likely create yet another tragedy in Colorado. Again, I want to thank the board for allowing me to speak and for opening this process up to public comment. Thanks again.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Sir.
Okay, next on our list for public comment is Eve and Rob Nagode. Is Eve or Rob there, or both of them?
How do you say the last name?
Nagode, Nagode. There we go. I saw Mason. Might come up. No, that's Osgood. There we go.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, we can. It's stuff in that.
Okay,
For your
thank you.
page.
Yes, my name is Eve Nogady, and I live in Canyon City. And on behalf of my husband, Bob, and myself, we wish to thank you for inviting our participation in the Mined Land Reclamation Board rulemaking process. We feel it's critically important process given the potential for mines to adversely impact our water quality at a time of diminishing water supplies due to climate change. We support the adoption of the proposed draft rules for the implementation of HB 19-1113, and we support the amendments proposed by conservation groups. The bipartisan bill passed in 2019 intends to reduce the risk that hard rock mines pose to the environment and to taxpayers. The legislation makes it far less likely that any future mines in Colorado will become perpetual polluters or mines that will require permanent water treatment systems. We in Canyon City live in a proposed, we in Canyon City live near a proposed mine that shouldn't be built and will likely be a perpetual polluter. We are already living with a Superfund site within our city that is a result of another mining industry. Historically, runoff from this proposed mining area goes directly into the pristine Grape Creek, which then feeds into the Arkansas River, where we get our drinking water. We want rules that will make sure our water is protected forever and our recreational industry is protected. The costs of maintaining and protecting water quality should be fully incorporated into the bonding requirements for mines to protect downstream communities from pollution and from bearing the costs of treatment if a mine operator can't or won't uphold its water treatment obligations. This guarantees that water quality will be protected into the future long after a mine closes. The board should approve the strongest rules possible to protect the public interest in the environment. The new rules should apply the state statute as written without leaving room for loopholes. Bob and I appreciate the opportunity to comment, and the public process has been undertaken in order to better implement Colorado's mining laws. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Thank you very much.
Very good. The next person on our list is Peggy Rath. There you go, Peggy.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. Yes, so thank you, Madam Chairperson, and to the Mined Land Reclamation Board for allowing public comment during this process. I live in Dawson Ranch, Canyon City. I understand the board is considering changes to two rules that are key to the environment. As you said, HB 19-1113 will be reviewed today, and then tomorrow the period for temporary cessation will be reviewed. I am wholeheartedly opposed to the potential gold mine coming to our area. If for some nightmarish reason the gold mine does come into Fremont County along the Great Creek, Arkansas River, I want to see the strongest rules in place for protecting our water and environment, not only during the active operation of the mine, but after. Our water, as has been stated already, a very precious limited resource, needs perpetual protection. It's hard to say with braces, by the way. I support the ruling that will seek to faithfully implement Colorado's 10-year limit on delaying final reclamation after a mine stops operating. And I think it goes without saying, but this is a public hearing, so I will say it. All new mines in Colorado, regardless if they are in my backyard or not, need to have a true walkaway reclamation plan that includes no permanent need for water quality treatment. For example, if the proposed mine comes into Fremont County, you know, we certainly don't want to see them just come in here and destroy our beautiful way of life and walk away because they are bankrupt due to other investments around the world or can't afford to clean up our area because they didn't find enough gold here to make it worth it. I trust you will all make wise decisions that are for the greater good. Thank you for your attention to all of our comments.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board? Thank you.
Very good. Our next commenter is David Andrews.
You say Andrews?
Andrews.
Sorry, because I don't have those.
Mr. Andrews may possibly be a phone number.
Yeah, he's not muted, so.
Okay, Mr. Andrews, I believe your phone number, I hope your phone number is 970-640-8420. You are unmuted from our end, but we cannot hear you. Okay, we can hear you. Is this Mr. Andrews? Okay. All right, Mr. Andrews, this stuff you can speak now. You lost it. Yeah.
back to him.
All right, we'll come back to him and stuff. Well, Mr. Andrews and stuff, we can't hear you. There was a lot of feedback there. We'll try to come back to you here in a minute and stuff and that, so. So we'll go on, next on the list is Mr. Bob Larson. Mr. Larson?
Just as a matter of process, I don't know if everyone on Zoom can see this, but Cammie's scrolling through and unmuting the person who's able to speak, so that's why there's a bit of a delay here, and as long as the names line up, it's easier to find. Can they raise their hands? Is that easier for you to see?
It's okay, I got it.
You got it.
Yes. Sorry, he was under Craig Howe.
He's with Mr. Howe. Okay, very good.
Okay.
All right, Mr. Larson?
It looks like I'm unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes, Bob, we can hear you. I'm going to start your time now. Thank you.
Okay, great. My name is Bob Larson. I'm from Ouray, Colorado. I'm a Colorado native. I have an engineer of mines degree from the Colorado School of Mines and been involved in the mining industry for the last 50 plus years. So I wanted to share a couple thoughts with you in regards to the proposals that are being made. And the first regards the definition of production. And it appears to me that the purpose of this was to try to force operations into temporary cessation or to shut operations down completely after 10 years. And this is in spite of operators attempting to keep their property up and running, properties available for future use. As we all know, the mining industry is very cyclic. We have, metal prices and controls that affect what we're doing and how we're doing it. So it's been very important to me over the last 50 years to be able to access these old workings, to go back in to study the geology, the mineralization, see how they mined it, see what potential is there. And so if all of these are just shut down, well, we have no means of educating ourselves and bringing others in. As a matter of fact, just yesterday, I was in one of these historic mines that hadn't been totally closed, so I could show others what the mineralization was like in the Uravan mineral belt, what was controlling the mineralization and what the potential is. So it's been very important to me to be able to go into these old mines. In the San Juans, you take the Idorado, Camp Bird, Revenue Virginius, Ruby Trust, all of these mines that I've been a part of. It's very important to be able to access those and to go in and see really what was happening. And then when the economy changes and needs change like they are today, where we need those metals for the alternative energy projects, we need the silver for solar panels and all these materials for wind generators. These materials have to come from somewhere, and we've been blessed with tremendous resources in the state of Colorado, and we need to continue to develop and use those and use them to the best of our abilities. We can do that in an environmentally safe manner and do it in a way that's beneficial to all of us in society. In regards to water, I wanted to bring out once again that the mineralized areas we have in this state were created by the same processes or involved in the same processes that created the beauty, and the minerals and all of that are tied together. So in the San Juans, we have many natural occurring seeps and springs, etc. So Red Mountain Creek that runs into the Uncompahgre is what would be considered a polluted stream, but that is natural. It's been added to by some mining, and we're working on that, but our water needs to be handled in ways with new technology and new ideas. Infiltration of this water coming out is a very good way of handling this rather than building treatment plants, because it's just adding it back to the system of where it came from and where it naturally occurred. So we need to look at that a little bit also and be aware of how all of this is happening. So I appreciate your concerns about promoting mining. I've been doing that for many years and continue to do that. And I want to be able to use these resources, especially at times like right now, where they are needed for all the other activities that are going on in our society. We can't depend on Russia to keep 20% of our power going in nuclear reactors. We need to be using our minerals here. So thank you for considering these, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you. I'd be willing to try to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you. Any questions? Thank you very much.
All right, we'll circle back to Mr. Andrews here in a second, but Mr. Bill Burnett is our next public commenter. Okay, Bill's in the same.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
You asked Mr. Larson to unmute.
Mr. Howell, you need to unmute. We can't, and stuff there. There you go.
You get to start from the top.
There you go. Okay, great. Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Burnett, you have 5 minutes and your time starts now. Thank you.
My name is Bill Burnett. I live in Norwood, Colorado, and I'm a retired plumber of many years. I'm a landowner. I'm not a miner or that. I lease my property to Nuvimco, who is a mining company, and they have taken care of my property. They're very diligent on the way things have been done, and I'm all for mining. They've taken care of my property and my neighbor's property that isn't even part of their lease. They're just, I just support mining tremendously. I'm not a speaker, as you can tell, but anyway, I think we should allow the mining and and not just be regulated by regulation after regulations that just keep them from mining. I would like to remind people that you can't have your environmental things such as the wind generators, electric cars, and all of this stuff without mining and drilling. So I think it's very important that we keep the mining, and I think they can comply to any regulations that are reasonable. That's all that I really have to say, but I don't want some of my income taken away just because you feel that mining shouldn't be done. It's very important for our industry. Thank you.
Thank you. From the board? Maybe Mr. Reed, you're gonna try to find that.
Yeah, let's see if we can try one more time to connect with Mr. Andrews.
Okay, I can unmute him. He's not muted, so.
Okay, we're on, Mr. Andrews, we're unmuted on our end, but we cannot hear you. Okay, I would like to suggest that perhaps Mr. Andrews could submit his comments in writing and stuff and that will forward them onto the board. Or if we can figure something out maybe tomorrow morning.
That's
all right. All right, our apologies, Mr. Andrews. We're at, looks like we're having technical difficulties on one end or another there. So, but with that concludes our list of requested public commenters, and we're ready to go on to the next phase.
So at this time, we will be bringing up the division. This is going to be an introduction by the division. They will have 60 minutes in which to present an overview of the rulemaking process and proposed amendments and changes to the rules. So please, address your name when you come up here. Again, this is just a presentation. We don't need to do any swearing or anything because it's just an introduction or.
Again, Jeff, I don't believe we have to swear in for this. It's more of a presentation than testimony.
Okay. Sounds good. Sure. We are in the, that's Cammy. Yeah, just making sure.
If that one has to be muted, or you'll hear the reverb on the back.
All right, while you're doing that, it's all this stuff, so. As we begin the division's presentation today, I would like to remind the board of today's focus of 1113. 1113 in many ways codifies what the division has been doing for years. The division and the board look harder today at hydrological balance impacts than even say 5 or 10 years ago. Those mines today with perpetual water treatment are those that have historic mining operations dealing with pre-law conditions or had unforeseen impacts at the time of approval. The board nor the division has ever approved an application where perpetual water treatment was the proposed final reclamation, nor will it in the future. 1113 strengthens those tenets. Self-bonding became a bad idea when several mega coal mines failed financially. The idea of too big to fail was proven wrong. So striking this option that was only ever used once by an operator strengthens our financial warranty portfolio. The edits throughout the rules reflect modern communications. Submittals via email and posting on the website are efficient, modern, and accepted, as well as reducing staff workloads. Other benefits include saving paper and improving transparency for all. So with that, I'm going to turn over and bring up our PowerPoint presentation, and Michael Cunningham will walk us through that presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair, members of the board. It's great to see everybody in person. My name is Michael Cunningham. I'm the Senior Environmental Protection Specialist here at the division, and it's my pleasure to present you with an overview of House Bill 19-1113 this morning concerning the protection of water quality from adverse impacts caused by mineral mining. As I work my way through the presentation, at any time if you have questions, just please stop me. I will do my best to answer those. Just to start us off with a very brief chronology, House Bill 19-1113 was introduced to the House and assigned to the Committee for Rural Affairs and Agriculture in January 15, 2019. Governor Polis signed the bill into law on April 4th the same year, and the effective date of the bill was August 2nd, 2019. As Mr. Means indicated, House Bill 19-1113 touched on the following 4 areas, which I will discuss in greater detail here in just a second. It touched on self-bonding, annual reporting requirements, water quality treatment, and the inclusion of water quality protection into the required financial warranty. So I'll just provide a little bit more summary for each of those 4 areas. As Russ indicated, the Act eliminated self-bonding. With respect to our annual reports, the Act requires that annual reports now describe the affected land and the surrounding area, including changes over the preceding year regarding any disturbances to the prevailing hydrologic balance and to the quality and quantity of water, surface, and groundwater systems. The Act also requires that a reclamation plan for a new or amended permit demonstrate by substantial evidence an end date for necessary water quality treatments to ensure compliance with applicable water quality standards. And lastly, the Act requires that financial warranties must include the costs associated with the protection of water resources, including costs necessary to cover water quality protection, treatment, and monitoring as may be required by the permit. I just want to point out for the board that the requirement to include water quality protection in a financial warranty is actually something that the rules already touch on under Rule 4.2.1, Parent 4, which states in part that the amount of the financial warranty shall be sufficient to assure the completion of reclamation of affected lands. And reclamation includes all measures taken to assure the protection of water resources, including those costs to cover necessary water quality protection, treatments, and monitoring as are required by the permit, the act, and the rules. So the division has accounted for the cost of water treatment in our financial warranties, along with monitoring at sites where that is a component of the permit. So because we have this already in rule, there was not a corresponding rule change that we added. We just now have statute that backs up the rule. So again, I have a real short discussion on self-bonding, but as the board is aware, we have numerous types of financial warranty instruments that our operators can post. Self-bonding was one of those. Under the self-bonding option, the operators had to submit an audited financial statement as proof that they had sufficient funds to perform reclamation in lieu of a bond or other financial assurance. So the good news is that the division does not currently hold any self-bonds, and so this change is not going to have any impact on any of our operators. And to address the elimination of self-bonding, the following rules were struck out of the rules, out of the hardware rules. So we had several definitions surrounding self-bonding, and then we had 2 references under Rule 4, which deals with our financial warranty instruments. The annual reporting requirements for House Bill 1911-13, as I mentioned, now require that the end reports include changes over the preceding year regarding any disturbances to the prevailing hydrologic balance and changes over the preceding year regarding any disturbances to the quality and quantity of water, surface, and groundwater systems. Currently, our end reports do ask our operators to verify compliance with applicable Colorado water laws. In general, those questions are geared more towards water quantity, exposure of groundwater, and then an affirmation that you have the necessary approvals in place, an augmentation plan, well permit, or substitute water supply plan. Following this rulemaking, we will modify our annual report form to include these additional questions to ask our operators to attest to any changes in water quality over that preceding year. This is just really one tool that staff has available to them to assess any changes in water quality conditions at a mine site. In general, if impacts to the prevailing hydrologic balance were anticipated during that permitting process, we would have established a monitoring plan, and we would also be taking a look at that data as it comes in. Typically, that data is submitted with the end report. But should we not have anything in the data that would indicate something, and yet the operator was to indicate this to the end report form, that would give us an opportunity to further reach out to them and figure out what's going on here and get a handle. So that really covers the first 3 changes that were required by the act. I would like to spend some time talking about water treatment. So the act requires that most reclamation plans demonstrate by substantial evidence the reasonably foreseeable end date for any water quality treatment necessary to ensure compliance with applicable water quality standards. And this really is put into place to ensure that the division through their permitting process does not approve a reclamation plan where perpetual water treatment is considered. Language from the act was directly incorporated into the following rules. The division's approach to creating these rules was really to carry forward that language directly from the act in an effort to preserve the legislative intent. So we can pull up any of these rules if the board would like, but I just note we had a couple additions under Rule 1.13 for temporary cessation. Of course, prior to putting a site into temporary cessation, we want to ensure that that operator has the means and ability to continue with any necessary environmental monitoring out there at that site during the period of cessation. We also included a reference under Rule 3. Rule 3 is our general reclamation performance standards, which would apply to all of our mining operations. And we also have several references under Rule 6. Rule 6.3 specifically addresses our 110 operations. And we had 2 inclusions under Rule 6.4, which would be specific to our 112 operations. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the applicability of House Bill 19-1113 and the different situations to which this will apply. Wanted to point out, because I think you're going to hear these terms over and over again today throughout my presentation and through the discussion that we're going to have. These were introduced through the Act, reasonably foreseeable end date and by substantial evidence. I want to note for the board that the division has elected not to define these terms due to the broad applicability of such terms and the highly site-specific nature of water quality treatment, which is to say that a reasonably foreseeable end date at one site for one type of treatment may not translate to another site. You might have differences depending on what you're treating for, the nature that you're treating water. Is this an active treatment system with a water treatment plant, or are we treating water in a more passive manner through constructing wetlands? Those would be things that we would have to consider when determining what that reasonably foreseeable end date might look like. And really, staff wanted to retain that discretion to try to determine both of those as we look at these proposed plans that come across our desk. Rule 3.1.6, parent 1, subparent I states that no permit shall be approved where perpetual water treatment is proposed as final reclamation unless otherwise exempted by these rules. We thought it was important to have this in there. I do want to acknowledge for the board that this really codifies the division's long-standing practice of not approving reclamation plans that propose perpetual water treatment. It's true that we do have sites that do require perpetual water treatment, but those conditions were unforeseen at the time of permit. So if a new or amended application will require water quality treatment, the applicant must demonstrate by substantial evidence a reasonably foreseeable end date for water quality treatment necessary to ensure compliance with applicable water quality laws. Now, the Act provided some exemptions, and I'd like to talk about 3 that are present in our rules. So a reclamation plan may be approved which lacks substantial evidence of a reasonably foreseeable end date to water treatment if that new or amended application contains an environmental protection plan and a reclamation plan to ensure compliance with water quality standards, and upon determining one of the following. This first exemption would be the site was previously mined but not permitted as of January 1st, 2019, that the existing water quality conditions do not meet applicable standards and no reasonably foreseeable end date for water quality treatment would be established. This would apply to both new applications and amendments. The second exemption afforded states that the application is limited to reclamation of already mined ore or other waste materials, including mine drainage runoff as part of a cleanup. And this would be specific to new applications. This would be a situation where somebody, an entity is trying to clean up perhaps legacy mining impacts, but there would be no commercial aspect to this project. We would not be selling or introducing minerals into the marketplace. And then again, on slide 13, I carried forward some of the language and listed the third exemption. So again, for a new or amended application, we have to have both an environmental protection plan and a reclamation plan that ensures compliance with water quality standards. And for this third exemption, the water quality impacts that have occurred or are occurring for which no reasonably foreseeable end date for water quality treatment can be established, or either unforeseen at the time of approval of the reclamation plan or existing at the mine site permitted on or before January 1st, 2019. I think that this third exemption is the one we will probably have the most discussion on through the course of today's hearing. And it's likely the one that will be of most interest to our existing operators. So what is an applicant to do if they're submitting an application and they don't believe that there's going to be any impact to the prevailing hydrologic balance, either from a quantity or quality perspective? Rule 3.1.6, parent 1, parent E states, where a proposed amendment to a reclamation plan is not anticipated to impact water quality of hydrologic balance, the applicant operator shall submit a statement and demonstration by substantial evidence for review by the office and/or board. This provision was added to the rules really again to clarify how applicants should address compliance with House Bill 1911-13, so they believe that the proposed operation will not impact water quality and quantity. This new demonstration contemplated under Rule 3.1.6 is not necessarily a new concept for the division. A similar process is contemplated under the existing Rule 6.4.7 parent 1, which states where an applicant must describe if the operation is expected to directly affect surface or groundwater systems. And they are to state that if the operation is not expected to directly affect surface groundwater systems, then a statement to that effect and sufficient demonstration of that expectation shall be submitted. So this is one part of the division's historic review, looking at applications and trying to assess whether or not those proposed operations will impact the hydrologic balance. I think I'll just pause there. That takes us through the changes for 1911-13. Are there any questions from the board at this time?
Any questions from the board? I had, I'm sure this will come up in further discussion. I don't remember which slide it was, maybe 6 or something, when you were talking about the annual reporting requirements, about water quality or something. If maybe it's a new thing to report some of those items to the division, is that not most of those things standard that they might already be reporting to another agency already? Say water quality, there might be water quality standards that they're already reporting to another agency, even if it hasn't been written into the rules, that they also need to report that to the division.
Yeah, that certainly could occur with a lot of our operators. In general, when we have a situation like that, we're typically aware of it, and oftentimes what we ask for, even if that data is not being directly submitted to us under our permit, we do ask for that we want to be copied on that.
Right, I'm thinking from like an administrative standpoint, for the operator, you're not anticipating a lot of extra administrative or reporting requirements because likely the operator is already collecting this data. It's just not formally written into the rules that it goes to the division directly, maybe going to another agency already.
Yeah, we wouldn't anticipate any additional administrative or much additional administrative work on the part of the operator to address this question.
And as you stated, it's standard. Typically, you're copied on that information already.
We're copied on it, or we're already getting it directly submitted as part of our permit. So.
All the contents of stipulation approval. Our monitoring plan system, the stipulation is to submit that information to the division.
So at this time, I'd like to just discuss some of the general edits that were made. There was a number of general edits and editorial edits that we made throughout the rules. This is not going to be a comprehensive overview of all of those, but we just wanted to draw the board's attention to some of the most important general edits that were made. The first one does tie into water requirements. So under Rule 3.1.6, Parent 1, Parent F, the language that is underlined has been added to that particular rule. And really that is to reflect the statutory exceptions to demonstrating a reasonably foreseeable in-date water quality treatment. And that rule reads as, except as specified in subsections G through H of this subsection, a reclamation plan for a new or amended permit must demonstrate by substantial evidence a reasonably foreseeable in-date for the water quality treatment necessary to ensure compliance with applicable water quality standards. The next general edit, as Russ mentioned in his opening comments, we went through and did our best to clean up a lot of rules that were what I call outdated, but we were an effort to bring the rules into the 21st century to help not only staff, but our operators gain some efficiencies. As the board, I'm sure, is aware, we have a lot of rules that direct the submittal of hard copy notices or direct the division to send out hard copies. So I think this is really just an improvement that touches on electronic communication for emails, electronic submittals of reports, electronic notices, receipts, things along those lines. Again, the list in front of you here is not comprehensive, but as you would imagine, we've got references throughout all of the rules on this. So we're pleased to get these cleaned up. We had a number of changes under Rule 1 for application review and consideration process, public notice procedures, submission of comments, and petitions for hearing. We also, under Rule 2, had some updates for board meetings, permit application hearings, decisions and appeals, excuse me, and also under Rule 4 for performance of financial purchases.
Actually did have a question there. I remember in one of our previous hearings, it came up that perhaps the operator had posted in the local newspaper, but no one really got the local newspaper. So there was a question about how people might have known about pre-hearing conference or the opportunities to make comment. I saw a lot of references to adding the division's website, the notice on the division's website in minutes. How are we telling the public that that will be listed on your website and that they might inform themselves there? It still feels like a little bit of a challenge for people to know to go. But
Absolutely, yeah. It's still a challenge, much like the newspapers or even posting it to a website other than the divisions. How do you know to go there?
Yeah.
We've not had any sort of widespread messaging out to the public as of yet. Part of it is we're still going through some iterations on what the website looks like and how we're posting that information, but it is becoming more standard for us. So at least for the time being, we take every opportunity that comes our way when we're dealing with the public. We've got contentious applications in front of us to try to disseminate that information. And hopefully over time that just, the word gets out and that becomes sort of the norm and folks know that to come to our website as a resource. But it is something we're going to continue to give some thought to. And certainly happy to take suggestions from the board on better ways to do that.
Yeah, this Russ speaks for the division. One of the things that we've been struggling with and stuff is we have a general public that doesn't read the newspaper. So how do we get a notice? So then it's like, okay, maybe I'm another part of this, well, I don't read the internet or that or whatever. So no matter what we do, there's going to be some kind of a hole there. One of the things and stuff that we're trying to do and stuff is incorporate in the public notice as well as in the notice posted at the site, that they can go to the website to find out that information. That's kind of the best very good solution we've got coming up right now. And like I said, we're searching for the best avenue just as well as the board or the general public. So everybody doesn't like this or doesn't like that, but nobody really has the infinite solution and stuff and what it is and stuff. So we do our best. We think that the process is doing the best it can, but no matter what happens, an operator can put it into a newspaper and they don't get that newspaper, they get some other newspaper. So there has to be a line and stuff there that what's reasonable for an applicant and stuff to do as well as ourselves and stuff like that. But we are trying to address that.
yeah, okay, well, I appreciate the effort.
You bet. That's all.
Thank you for that reminder.
That's a challenge.
It is.
Something we gotta figure out.
Yeah, other than big, huge lighted billboards or
Right.
something, I don't know. In 2019, with the construction materials, and actually I think we did it in part of our too, we changed the size of the public notice at the mine site. We had folks and stuff putting in 9x11 pieces of paper out there, and we prescribed the size and stuff that's very similar to a county language permit and stuff. That's we did our best and stuff there to help with the uniform kind of size for that. That helps out. But like I said, people driving by on the interstate or something like that, they're not gonna read that. They have to turn around and come back or something. So we're always looking for better solutions. We're always open to that discussion.
Okay, so the next general edit dealt with designated chemicals. And if the board recalls at the February board meeting, Russ presented to the board the designated chemicals list and overview and explanation of how that works. So the change that occurred here was to the definition of designated chemicals and was really to account for the development of this designated chemicals list. The language that is underlined is what was added to that definition, and it reads as follows. Designated chemicals are toxic or acidic chemicals identified by the applicant operator and accepted or determined by the office for use within the permit area in extractive metallurgical processing, the use of which has been determined at certain concentrations which represent potential threat to human health, property, or the environment. So again, we're just closing that loop there to account for the new designated chemicals list. And the last general edit that I want to discuss with the board this morning concerns milling. And just for the board's understanding, the definition of custom milling, which used to be contained under the hard rock rules, was removed during the formal rulemaking that occurred in 2019. So previously, we did have a definition for custom mill or a toll mill being a mill that is not captive to any particular mine site, but is able to run multiple ore streams through that. So we did remove that formally in 2019. Following the removal of the definition, the division worked with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment's Hazardous Materials Waste Management Division to update our MOU to account for this change. And that MOU was revised to clarify that milling is a mining activity, which is subject to the provisions of the Act and rules and is solely regulated by the division. Prior to that, a custom mill would have been regulated by the health department. So we changed we removed the definition, we updated our MOU, and these changes that I'm presenting on slide 19 were really just to kind of close the loop on all of that. So the term milling was added to the definitions of extractive metallurgical processing and mining operation. In addition, extractive metallurgical processing is referenced under the definition of affected lands. And this was just to make it clear that milling is a mining activity. And regardless of whether that is a custom mill or a mill that's tied to any particular mine site, it would fall under the jurisdiction of the division. And that is the last general edit that I have to the board. Again, happy to field any questions if there are any on those general edits.
Questions or discussion from the board right now?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So next we will be hearing a presentation, commentary from the conservation groups. And they will have up to 60 minutes of total time in which to make a presentation to the board regarding their comments. Time should be allocated between the presentation and the rebuttal at the commenter's prerogative, but shall not exceed 60 minutes in total. So.
Okay, so Russ, who am I unmuting?
You need Mr. Parsons.
So you're unmuting Mr. Parsons, who will take the lead on introducing anyone who you are having present along with you or something like that. Mr. Parsons.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. I do appreciate the opportunity to speak and present. I definitely want to start off with thanking the division for its, as I think Russ explained in the beginning, it was an unexpectedly long process because of COVID and all of the complications associated with that. But I do think that through their hard work, the issues have been narrowed considerably, and that this rulemaking, particularly today's, is probably going to be a lot shorter than it might otherwise had been had the division not put in such substantial effort and communication and opportunities for people to talk and vet these ideas. So thank you to the division. I do want to make sure the board's aware. Today, I'm an attorney with an organization called the Western Mining Action Project. We represent Information Network for Responsible Mining, Sheep Mountain Alliance, Conservation Colorado, San Juan Citizens Alliance, Earthworks, Wilderness Workshop, Save the Colorado, and Arkansas Valley Conservation Coalition. So those are the parties that fall under sort of the banner that of the conservation groups, as you've heard it referred to. I just want to make sure that you're aware that it is a very broad both in terms of their interests as well as their geographic placement around the state. It is a broad coalition. I don't want you to think that just because we've exercised some efficiency in condensing our presentation into one, that it has any less of a broad focus. So, and I want to also, as far as other participants in my presentation, I do have one witness I intend to call to give a brief partial presentation in mine, and that's Jenny Russell, who's a director on the Southwest Water Conservancy District here in Colorado, and I'll get to her in a minute. I do want to just alert the board that there are a couple issues with some of the language, but by and large, the rule language with regard to the end date requirement and House Bill 191113, the rule language really does mirror the statutory language, and I think that's very appropriate. The bill was vetted among all of the stakeholders. It was subject to a pretty robust legislative process, and it passed overwhelmingly and was signed by the governor. And I think it makes sense to incorporate the language as faithfully as possible directly into the rules. And as the division pointed out, I think that strategy also has the side benefit of lending itself to providing sort of the maximum flexibility for the division and the board to look at the individual circumstances, case-by-case circumstances with each mine amendment or mine permit that comes forward. And that's highly appropriate given the variety of situations that each individual mine might encounter with respect to things as complicated as water quality. At this point, I think I'd like to call my witness, Jenny Russell. If we could get, if Ms. Mohar could unmute Jenny Russell, I think we can have her give a presentation and then I can finish my remarks. Ms. Russell, please introduce yourself to the board and proceed. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Jenny Russell. I'm the president of the board of the Southwestern Water Conservation District. The district was created by the General Assembly in 1941 and is comprised of all or part of 9 counties in southwestern Colorado and represents the diverse water users in those 9 watersheds. The district's statutory charge is to protect, conserve, use, and develop the water resources of the San Juan and Dolores River basins for the welfare of its constituents. To better implement its mission, the district recently approved its strategic plan, which addresses, among other issues, our concerns for water quality and the impact of climate change on water quality due to reduced flows. Several of our counties include historic and ongoing mining, including the Animas River Basin, which was especially impacted by historic mining and has dozens of mines that will require perpetual water treatment, including the Gold King mine. One concern that our board has discussed is the increasing cost for small water providers and their customers, as well as other water users, of treating contaminated water, which shifts the burden onto those water users who did not create the contamination and who are least able to pay, or in the case of ranchers and farmers, do not have the means of treating the water they use directly from the river. Our district also supports the water recreation industry, which is an important economic driver for many of our communities. This industry relies on healthy rivers with good water quality, uncontaminated by mine runoff. The district supported HB 191113, which includes the end date requirement for water treatment, because it's important to protecting water supplies for the long term, and because it ensures that it will not be the taxpayers who bear the cost of mine remediation. The exception to the end date requirement that was put into the legislation for mine reclamation projects is important and helpful, and it aligns with the district's support of cleanup of historic mines. Other exceptions proposed to exempt new mines and significant reclamation plan amendments on a discretionary basis were not part of the legislation and so not supported by the district. The proponents of the legislation worked long and hard with water users, including our board, to obtain support for the legislation and its specific language, including exemptions. In fact, when they initially came to us, the board was not prepared to support the bill. However, after revisions that addressed the concerns of water users and others, the board eventually supported the legislation as passed. To add exemptions not specified in the legislation is contrary to the intent of the legislation, the water users that supported it, and the compromise it represented. This board should adopt the language of the rules drafted by division staff with respect to this issue without additional exemptions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. That's one way to get the lawyer to be quiet, is keep him on mute. Thank you, Ms. Russell. That, I do want to just emphasize for the board the importance of this legislation to water users around the state, as evidenced by Ms. Russell's statements. And getting to that focus on the legislative language, I do want to talk a little bit about the revisions that were proposed just in the last week or so from the division and was referenced in the presentation this morning. And this is in particular, I want to talk about Rule 3.1.61E. And this is a provision that was not in the prior drafts. It was added on May 10th. I believe it was an attempt to sort of navigate the proposals that came in through the pre-hearing statements and the rebuttal statements. But I do have some concern with this language. It appears to add an exemption to the statute that was not there in the legislative language. The legislation says that any new mine permit application or amendment requires compliance with the end date requirement. Now that exempts, by its nature, technical revisions. And so small changes to reclamation plans would not have to go through the demonstrating by substantial evidence an end date for water treatment. But the legislation's fairly clear, I think expressly clear, that any other amendment would have to do so. The language in subparagraph E here talks about it says where a proposed amendment to a reclamation plan or permit is not anticipated to impact water quality or hydrologic balance, the operator shall submit a statement and demonstration by substantial evidence for review. Now, it doesn't specifically say that it exempts, but that's the implication here. And my concern with that is that it may lead to a situation where you have a mine that's having water quality problems that seeks to do an amendment. And even though the amendment won't directly impact the water quality, the mine is. And that mine, going through that amendment process, should be subject to the end date requirement. Now, if it's a dry mine or a mine that has no significant water quality issues, then compliance with that end date requirement will be fairly easy. It will not be a large regulatory burden for the mine to reach. But I do believe the intent of the legislation was to encompass permit amendments for any permit amendment for a mine that's having water quality problems to bring that mine within the ambit of this end date requirement. And my concern is that subparagraph E creates an exemption that was not included in the legislation. And so my suggestion would be that the board strike subparagraph E from rule 3.6.1, rule 3.1.61 as not consistent with the statute. Indeed, when the legislation was going through the Senate on second reading on the Senate floor, there was an amendment proposed. It was L005, sponsored by Senator Coram, and it would do exactly what E purports to do, which is where there's in the legislative amendment, they called, and I know the word amendment gets a little overused here, but in the legislative amendment, it tried to exempt technical amendments to a permit. That was the language, technical amendments to a permit from the end date requirement. And my understanding is that the purpose of that was to say, just like E does, where someone believes that an amendment will not impact water quality, that it ought to be exempt from this requirement. And that amendment failed. And that tells me that the legislative intent was to be as encompassing as possible, that where a mine goes forward with an amendment, it needs to be subject to this requirement for a demonstration of by substantial evidence of an end date for water quality treatment. And again, if the mine is dry or the mine has no existing water quality issues, that demonstration is not going to be difficult. It's only where you've got a mine that's having serious problems, and there are some, where that requirement is going to raise an issue, as it should, because those are the mines that we definitely want to bring into compliance and make sure we have a handle on for the long term. And I'll note, as raised in the Colorado Mining Association papers submitted in this rulemaking, that the bill does protect, and the language in the rules does protect existing mines. That is to say, if a mine is permitted as of the effective date of the act and does not need an amendment, then there's no risk that it's going to be subject to this end date requirement. It is only when a mine comes in for that amendment that the end date requirement is triggered. And so that's a significant issue, I think. I worry about this provision in E as being inconsistent with the statute. Now, I do appreciate that the language proposed in the rulemaking papers submitted by CMA had a much broader exemption in mind. That language wanted to exempt any time that an operator felt like the impact to the water quality would not be significant or not be material, or it would be unlikely. Those are all fairly nebulous terms that would create a fairly, at least risk, a fairly broad exemption to the end date requirement that was definitely not contemplated in the statute. And so I do appreciate that this subparagraph E is substantially narrower than the language proposed in the rulemaking papers submitted by the Colorado Mining Association. However, I still believe that subparagraph E carves an exemption out that was not just not contemplated by the statute, but indeed specifically rejected by the legislature in a proposed amendment on the Senate floor. And so that would be my suggestion, is that the board strike subparagraph E, which was proposed in the May 10th red line version of the rules that the division submitted. Other amendments made or changes made to the rules in that May 10th version, I think are very appropriate. And these were some suggested by Colorado Mining Association. I think they had some good ideas to clarify. And that is what's currently subparagraph F of that section, where it specifies the subsections where there are statutory exemptions to the end date requirement. And then I agree with this in principle. The division in the last amendment in the proposed on May 10th by the division in the red line, and this was proposed by CMA as well, is in the exhibit rules. This is in rules 6.3.4, 6.4.5, and 6.4.7. It essentially incorporates the end date requirement and the exemptions into those exhibits. But I think that maybe it's a typo, but maybe it just needs to be broadened a bit. It currently says in those exhibits a requirement to demonstrate a reasonably foreseeable end date respecting water quality treatment. Then it says as required in rule 3.1.61 G through H. And G through H are only the exceptions. So there's a little disconnect there, because saying that they need to comply with the reasonably foreseeable end date requirement in just the exceptions is a little off, I think. So I think that instead of saying as required in 3.1.61 G through H, it ought to say F through I. And I think that would be encompassing not only the exemptions, but also the baseline requirement that a reasonably foreseeable end date is established. And I think the division can probably look at that while the other parties were thinking, while the other parties are presenting, and can give its position on that. So that's those are the major provisions that I wanted to talk about in terms of the language. And really it's just that E that's giving us a little bit of heartburn here. It's an exemption, I think, that has the potential to allow mines with significant water quality problems to effectively evade the end date requirement, which was not contemplated by the statute. I do just want to raise one other issue with respect to the end date requirement, and that is the sort of the technical aspects of it. I talked earlier, and the division mentioned how it's important to have a case-by-case analysis of the water quality and geologic and hydrogeologic conditions of a site. And those can be technical and very site-specific. And while I appreciate that the language in the rules and the statute is broad enough to allow that discretion to go forward and be implemented, I do think that the rules would benefit, and the public and frankly, and the operators would benefit greatly from having the board advise or instruct the division to prepare some technical guidance for how it's going to go about reviewing and establishing what the end date, how the end date requirement is going to be applied as a technical matter. And in the conservation group's pre-hearing statement, we attached a fairly robust report from Dr. Ann Maest, who is a well-known hydrogeologist, and she cites a whole raft of scientific principles that need to be considered with respect to establishing an end date. And a lot of it requires determining the hydrogeologic baseline and those hydrogeologic considerations and factors are going to be necessary to have substantial evidence of a reasonably foreseeable end date. And I understand that, of course, Dr. Mace does not have a monopoly on good science. And the Colorado Mining Association submitted a paper or a short presentation from an expert that they had contracted with to also give some input. And I would certainly say that the division ought to consider all relevant science in coming up with that kind of technical guidance. But I think that technical guidance is going to be very important in the long term. And I would ask the board to instruct the division to move forward with preparing that kind of technical guidance so that a lot of the issues and the technical issues can be worked out and understood on the front end instead of having to go through the process and then have these technical questions be raised for the first time in the division review or in the board hearing itself. So those are really the only issues that we wanted to address with respect to the end date requirement. Again, I think that's a testament to the hard work the division has done. To recap, we would ask that the board strike subparagraph E in that 3.1.61 and also instruct the division to create a technical guidance document to aid in the processing of this end date requirement. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from the board? Mr. Parsons or no? I want to do a quick time check, depending on how people are feeling for the consistency and flow, prefer to keep all of the commentary. We had the division, we had the conservation groups, we have CNA coming up next. Kind of stay within that mindset since we're here, and then maybe take a quick break or even possibly, I don't know what your lunch timing is there. Does that?
We've got about 45 minutes.
45
and one
minutes.
should be here.
Okay. So either
Give or
way,
take.
I'm going to suggest a quick break or possibly lunch, depending on how long the next presentation goes.
Perfect.
But I would like to keep, all the commentary, initial commentary first, so that they're all on the same page. Is that okay? Okay. All right. So with that, we're going to bring up the Colorado Mining Association and industry groups. The commenter shall have 60 minutes. 60 minutes of total time in which to make a presentation to the board regarding their comments. Time should be allocated between the presentation and rebuttal at the commenter's prerogative, but shall not exceed 60 minutes total. And with that, we will unmute Mr. Dempsey, and please introduce yourself and anyone else who may be speaking.
Jim Sanderson, Stan Dempsey, and Rich Ziegler.
All unmuted. Okay, sounds good.
If I could just make a brief comment, I'm Jim Sanderson, and the CMA presentation will include remarks from Stan Dempsey, who's the president of the organization, and Rich Ziegler, who is the representing the Western Small Miners Group. And then we will have a couple of other witnesses, Jim Finley, Dr. Jim Finley, and also Poppy Staub with Olray Silver Mine. So with that, I would ask Stan to give his opening, and then we'll move on and try to free up for your lunch.
Thank you, Jim. Once again, my name is Stan Dempsey. I'm president of the Colorado Mining Association, and I'm here to introduce the association and tell you a little bit about the way we prepared for this hearing. We're the oldest professional mining industry trade association in the United States, and we're comprised of companies who are actively engaged in the exploration, production, and refining of metals, coal, and industrial minerals, and the businesses and individuals that offer services and supply to the mineral mining industry. We honor Colorado's world-class mining heritage and continue to grow safe, sustainable, and responsible mining across the mine life cycle through education, advocacy, and meaningful engagement and collaboration with local communities, policymakers, and members of the public. So we appreciate that opportunity to do that today. CMA is supportive of a vibrant and strong regulatory program that carries the goals set out in the Colorado Mine Reclamation Act, and at the same time promotes the development of our natural resources. We're obviously eager to brag that Colorado, and you know this, is the largest producer of molybdenum and the third largest producer of gold in the United States. When House Bill 1113 from 2019 was introduced and passed in the 2019 legislative session, we provided feedback and suggestions on behalf of our members to the sponsors, and we also engaged with the proponents of the bill. We discussed the concepts in the bill with the advocates representing the conservation community specifically, which led to agreement on the bill's application to certain mining situations. Since enactment of the bill, we have participated in the various stakeholder meetings and provided an input into the DRMF staff's development of these proposed rules. And again, like other presenters, we want to thank the division specifically for their interest and responsiveness to our suggestions. The CMA has a hard rock committee and a uranium committee, and both those committees meet monthly, and those are opportunities we've had to distribute and collect comments from a variety of our members, and those are comments that have contributed to our positions on these issues. We strive to bring to your board and to the staff the collective views of the various issues in this rulemaking on behalf of large and small producers of hard rock mines in Colorado, and we believe the stakeholder meetings have been particularly productive. We have a rich mining history for a variety of minerals, and we believe that the decisions that you make regarding this topic will have a large impact on the state's ability to contribute to our country's growing need for strategic minerals that are necessary in the changing energy marketplace. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Stan. If the board has questions, they can interrupt us at any time, but we'll keep moving. And with that, I'd like to introduce Rich and have him make his introduction.
Good morning. I'm Rich Ziegler. I've been in the mining business for over 50 years, and today I'm here representing the Western Small Miners Association located in Montrose County, headquartered in Natarita, Colorado. It's a small town in southwestern Colorado. Our membership varies in their occupations and interests. We include miners, farmers, ranchers, energy producers, small business owners, local government officials, and local members of surrounding communities. Our members reside throughout the western United States, including the state of Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, Nevada, and Arizona. For years, we at the Western Small Miners Association hosted a meeting involving local, state, and federal authorities and other elected officials. These meetings have been attended by the governor, U.S. House Representatives, the department, the DRMS, Department of Natural Resources, the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, U.S. Forest Service, Department of Energy, the Department of Public Health and Environment, local county officials, and the CMA. These meetings have been very productive in discussing the issues relating to these rules and regulations and developing working relationships between companies and the government. Relationships have been built over many years with a variety of agencies, and we continue to have a good working relationship and working in coordination with all these agencies. Many in the Western Small Miners Association have worked with and alongside with these agencies to promote a viable mining industry. We are really small miners, and these rules and regulations affect us in a very much different manner than a large mining entity. These rules and regulations need to be written and interpreted with the small miner realities and interest in mind. Our infrastructure is totally different than large mines. We consist of small mining equipment and small mining crews, 2 to 6 employees. We might get around a shift a day at a day shift, 10-hour shift, and pull out ore on the back shift. we don't pull thousands of tons of ore per day like large groups do. We might get 30, maybe 50 tons produced per day on 2 shifts. I will tell you, it's kind of personal. I will tell you that anyone who has mined in a small mine with a small crew to make a living would take offense to the word token as it relates to the amount of ore that a crew can produce. In other words, our scale of mining is no way a comparison to a large mining group. These rules and regulations, along with our scope of operations and economics, especially in this world today, affect us much different on a day-to-day operation and our continued existence. We want to make sure that the board understands the plight of the small miner, especially in today's world. And as such, we will continue to be an integral part of the mining industry. The Western Small Miner Association appreciates the opportunity to participate with the DRMS, especially the DRMS. I agree with Jeff Parsons and Jim Sanders and Stan, Russ Means, Jenny, Brandon, and Fugate. They all have really helped us all come together and get this thing accomplished. If you guys got any questions or any concern, you can talk to me. I see John Reams was on the phone. He's here today. He's the president of the Mining Association, the Western Small Mining Group. But I know he's got other things going on this morning. And if you got any questions, you can ask me or Bob Larson, or it's been around for over 50 years. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Hearing no questions, Rich, I'll introduce myself, Mr. Chair or Madam Chair and members of the board. I wanted to also indicate our group that's came together on this filing. Again, Jim Sanderson, I'm with the law firm of Wellborn, Sullivan, Meck and Tooley. I'm also on the board of directors for the Colorado Mining Association, and I'm currently the vice chair for government affairs. And so I've been proud to work with these women and men in this industry. The filings that we made were on behalf of several parties that obtained party status. Colorado Mining Association, of course, Energy Fuels, Inc., Newmont Mining, Cripple Creek, and Victor, the Ouray Silver Mines, Inc., and as well as the Western Small Miners Association. The group that came together, as Stan described, on a monthly basis, decided to, as Jeff Parsons' group did, to work together to speak with a unified voice on these issues to save your time and that of the division. And we appreciate the process that the division created in this regard. I wanted to, since we're talking today about the implementation of House Bill 1911-13, I had a couple of overview comments I wanted to share and then introduce a couple of our folks to talk with you. The implementation of this new law will be challenging. I think you got a flavor from that with the division's presentation this morning. Jeff Parsons described, the provisions well, and a lot of the public testimony focused on, concern about new mines, and also concerns about the legacy of our 100+ years, 150 years of mining history in this state. We have a lot of legacy mines that are not controlled, have no ownership to go to. And so I think it's important to keep in mind that what the Colorado Mining Association group is talking about is existing mines that are operating, and many of them are at locations that are involved with decades, if not century-old processes. And so there are mines that have no end date for water treatment, even though they have water treatment in place. You have situations where over the decades, tunnels and avenues were built into the mountain, and there are not just miles, but dozens of miles of tunnels that go through fractured rock and intercept water that's in the mountain. And so there's, and those kind of facts led to some of the problems that some of the public witnesses talked about today that are uncontrolled. I think the division's orphan mine program is making a dent on that, but what we're talking about and want to focus your attention on are the existing mines that have water pollution control permits from the Water Quality Control Division of the Department of Health and Public Environment, and they are in compliance. And so the example that Jeff Parsons made in describing his concern about some language, we're not talking about mines that are causing a water quality problem. We're talking about mines that are meeting water quality standards and also are in compliance with their other parts of their reclamation plan. And as we move down the road in implementation of this new law, we're going to need more information and more focus on the kinds of changes that are going to be proposed at these existing mines. And with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Jim Finley, who's with Stantec. If you'd introduce yourself briefly, Jim, and then if you would comment on two things for the board. One is the issue of developing guidance. You know, the Mining Association understands that this is could be a tremendous resource problem or challenge for the division. And so we're not asking for it. It could be helpful, but we understand that there are priorities that have to be dealt with, and whether they could start tomorrow developing guidance is not something I'm aware of. But we asked Dr. Finley to take a look at and share with you the same kind of information that Ann Mace's report talked about. So you could, if you have questions, ask him and to give you some more background. And then secondly, Jim, if you would talk about the kinds of changes at existing mines that in your career you've seen that could trigger an amendment to an existing permit, but really shouldn't entail a significant amount of water quality treatment end date type of analysis.
Sure, Jim. Thank you. And thank you to the board for the opportunity to share some thoughts. My name is Jim Finley. As Jim mentioned, I'm with Stantec Consulting Services in Fort Collins, Colorado. I am a low temperature geochemist by training, so my PhD is in water rock interaction, and I have directed my professional career to hard rock mining, which I've been doing for 25 plus years now. I have worked in the state of Colorado, worked on a couple of mines for about 20 years now. So I'm well familiar with the rules and regulations, both of the division, as well as the discharge permits for water treatment facilities through CDPHE. And I've also worked elsewhere in the United States, Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, and I'm quite familiar with the rules and regulations in those states as well. I've also worked internationally in South America, Canada, a bit of New Zealand as well. So I've done a lot of this kind of work that's relevant to the issue at hand. And I agree with Dr. Mace, the calculation and estimations, predictions of long-term water quality in a mining setting is a non-trivial task. It is a complicated process and should have careful consideration given to the steps taken. The state of Colorado has some guidance in that regard in the current rules and regulations with regard to mining and making predictions of water chemistry. Probably would be a good idea to update those, especially in regard to the new legislation that's been passed. And as Dr. Mace pointed out, there are a number of existing guidances available. Probably the one that's closest to hand is the work that the state of Nevada has done. Of course, they have a very active hard rock mining industry in the state and have been dealing with challenges and issues related to mine water quality for a number of years and have instituted fairly rigorous guidelines for characterization and procedures to be followed for making predictions of water chemistry. So that's a great resource that I would encourage the division to draw on should the board direct the division to develop such guidance. There are other documents that I mentioned, the MEND organization in Canada, not the United States, but Canada has a very active mining industry as well. It is almost all hard rock mining, certainly for precious metals. And they have a long history dating back into the 1990s of developing guidance for directing the kinds of characterization work, hydrologic analysis, et cetera, that has been referenced to make these predictions of long-term water chemistry and the need for reasonable and foreseeable prediction of water treatment needs for water treatment. There's also a GUARD guide, which was produced by an industry group that has also had pretty broad distribution in the mining industry and regulatory community worldwide. So that's another resource that could be drawn on. And again, it's a non-trivial effort, but I believe it would be consistent with the intent of the legislation and would actually serve everyone to have a kind of common guide for the types of analyses necessary to address this question of reasonable and foreseeable end date for water treatment at mining sites. So that's phase one. I guess I'll pause and see if anyone has any questions before I go into step two. All right, I'll take that. I'm going to just share my screen. I just have a couple of items, examples I want to give that speak to the question of what kinds of amendments and addresses this question of, do you need to go through a full-blown analysis to predict the end date of water treatment? Certainly in a setting where there is no reasonable foreseeable end date to water treatment, how does an amendment in that scenario change that end date? So I'll just be brief on these, but for example, I'm assuming everyone can see my screen. Jim, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Tailing facility closure in the upper. This is an embankment on foundation material. Tailing is stored, and there's a water cover. And that's a change in the reclamation plan from a wet cover to a dry cover, where instead of water, there's soil placed. Now that's going to have a big influence on the hydrology of the system and understanding that water reporting from a tailing facility is one component of the overall mine site water balance. But this change in reclamation would constitute a change absolutely in the hydrologic balance for the mine itself, the mine water balance, and could have an influence on water treatment. But again, in a scenario where there's no reasonable and foreseeable end date to water treatment, this probably is not going to turn the needle in that regard. However, the point is that it would not be walking in the door just asking for an exemption. There would be demonstration, information communicated to support that assertion in this scenario. The second example I have, that will come up, is a scenario where on the left, there's a waste rock facility, with a road and the permit boundary. And as a consequence of a change in the mine plan, there's a need to place additional waste rock material and therefore a need to adjust the road and a change in the permit boundary. And that would be another scenario where there's an amendment. Now in this situation and again, I'm not saying this would happen all the time, but in this case, there's a pre-existing mature mine facility where the additional rock that would be placed is a small percent of the total that's already there. And in that scenario, again, this constitutes additional material, and that could be chemically reactive material, has an additional hydrologic footprint, clearly additional footprint itself. But again, with some demonstration, could be result in not a material change in the need for long-term water treatment. And again, these are just examples, things that absolutely I have seen happen and could happen. So with that, I will end my testimony and invite any questions, should there be any.
Thank you, Jim. I don't hear anyone. I don't see any hands waving. They're eyeing the lunch that arrived moments ago. And so with that, I'd like to introduce Poppy Staub, Vice President of Ouray Silver Mines, to provide some insight from an operator standpoint. You're on mute, Poppy.
I think you can unmute yourself because, no, Kimmy, you can't, okay. We're working on it, stand by.
Go up, that's John Reeves.
There you go.
Thank you. And thank you to the Mineland Reclamation Board for the opportunity to hear my testimony today. My name is Poppy Staub. I am here today representing the member companies of the Colorado Mining Association. I am the VP of Environmental and Government Affairs for Ouray Silver Mines. We are a small hard rock mine in Ouray County, Colorado. So I'm here to provide testimony on the proposed changes to the hard rock rules with regards to implementation of House Bill 1113. As Stan Dempsey mentioned earlier, several CMA member companies actively participated in the legislation of House Bill 1113 when it was proposed. And I think at least the member companies believe that it was not the intent of the legislature to impose an impossibility on the sustainability of mining in Colorado when it passed House Bill 1113. CMA and its member companies urge DRMS and the board to maintain flexibility in how it decides whether to approve a reclamation plan amendment for a mine that has never had a foreseeable end date to water treatment. As Dr. Finley and Mr. Sanderson mentioned earlier, many mine discharges have been in existence for decades, even centuries, and have water treatment and water rights requirements to support downstream uses of these water resources. The fractured bedrock systems through which these waters flow are difficult to model or predict, making forecasting a foreseeable end date extremely challenging, if not impossible. And I think Dr. Finley summed it up nicely that it's no trivial task to try to figure out how this water moves through these fractured systems with historic mine workings. The water quality from these mines varies and may even be better quality than the receiving streams. Sometimes these receiving streams are impacted by natural occurring mineralization. In some cases, water treatment is necessary for extended periods of time to protect state waters. So we believe the program should be administered so that an existing mine that has never had a foreseeable end date to its water treatment due to historic mine discharge should be able to avoid time-consuming and costly studies that will likely not yield new information or a different result than the status quo. Furthermore, as Dr. Finley presented just a second ago, there are several likely scenarios where amendments to a reclamation plan should not require development of a foreseeable end date to water treatment. These programs should be administered so as to avoid placing a burden on the mining operation for end date related studies, even when the proposed amendment is not expected to impact water balance and treatment needs of the mine. Yet another example is a scenario where there is a permitted mine with no foreseeable end date to water treatment plant, and that mine was permitted by the date of House Bill 1113, January 1st, 2019, that has an amendment request that would not materially affect the water treatment requirement. However, it could have some impact on the overall hydrologic balance. The rule should not prohibit the progression of a mine plan to accommodate an amendment to allow this example. And I cannot believe it was the legislative's intent to do so. Thus, CMA suggests the board adopt the revision presented by Mr. Sanderson and the exhibit, I think it was Rule 3.6.1E that Mr. Parsons mentioned earlier. It's important to note that the CMA member companies are not asking for an exemption to the rule, but rather we urge the board to adopt policy that allows for a screening approach or flexibility in how Rule 3.1.6E through I is implemented. Lastly, and I believe in the DRMS presentation, this was captured, but we noticed with respect to Rule 3.1.6I, the division's red line as of May 10th dropped the key language that was in the rule as proposed. In the most recent red line of the rule, it says no permit shall be approved or perpetual water treatment is proposed as final reclamation. This omits the language included in House Bill 1113 unless otherwise exempt by these rules. We understand the division as presented earlier intends to replace this qualifying statement at the end of the sentence. And we just want to make sure that the board includes it in its adopted rules. Again, thank you for your time. Just a quick bit about my background. I've been working for or on behalf of the mining industry for my entire 30-year career, most of that in the state of Colorado. And it's a great industry, and the industry works very hard to maintain compliance with regulatory requirements. And with that, I will turn it back over to Mr. Sanderson, and I thank you for your time.
Any questions from the board for Ms. Staub? Hearing none.
No,
Do we have one.
sorry to screw up your flow there. I was wondering what the industry's opinion feel is on this guidance document. Are you all feeling like that would be a really helpful tool that potentially you already need in your toolbox? Or is that another step the industry is uncomfortable with and feels it might be difficult to incorporate into your planning processes?
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure.
Okay. I think all of the above. I think anytime you can have guidance, it's helpful in how you move forward. So everybody's working from the same deck of cards. But at the same time, we recognize putting a guidance like that together is a tremendous amount of resource drain on the division. And there's a lot of information, as Mr. Parsons and Dr. Finley mentioned, there are guidance documents out there and information out there that industry can draw on to develop, try to figure out the hydrologic balance and the hydrogeology that's going on in the fractured bedrock systems. So I'm sorry, I probably didn't answer your question very definitively, but it's, would it be nice? Yes, but is it absolutely necessary? No.
Thank you. And then I had another question for Dr. Finley. I've not obviously been as deep in this process for the past 2 years, as you all have, and with the division heads. I guess I'm struggling a little bit with your examples. Can you put those back up on the screen if possible?
Yes, just a moment.
Thank you. Am I understanding you correctly that you feel like these are examples where these amendments would not trigger change the hydrologic balance? Am I understanding your point correctly? I just don't know if I am.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I probably did not articulate it very clearly. Yes, what I was trying to communicate is that there are circumstances that I feel should be acknowledged, represented, and CMA feels should be represented in the rules that acknowledge there could be a situation where there's a permit amendment. Okay, and the way the legislation reads now, the permit amendment would automatically institute, as Mr. Parsons mentioned, the need for a calculation of this reasonable and foreseeable end date for water treatment. So there's kind of two scenarios there. One in a mine that, as Poppy mentioned, there is no reasonable foreseeable end date because of the long historical mining history of the site and the level of interaction of rainwater with mine rock, etc. In that scenario, so if there's a needed amendment, again, what triggers the amendment are multiple, things, but in this case, let's say they're expanding the footprint of the waste rock facility. Whatever additional chemical mass may be contributed that would to the mine site water balance, right? And that's what is being treated already and will be for, again, not a foreseeable end date, is not going to make a material difference in that scenario in terms of the inability to predict the foreseeable end date to water treatment. So that's the one scenario. The other possibility, and again, these, regardless, both of these scenarios would require a demonstration to the division, right, to the division satisfaction, and to have their agreement with that. The second scenario is in a mine that doesn't necessarily have water management issues at this point in time. They've got water treatment system in place, and because they haven't gone through an amendment, haven't necessarily made the formal acknowledgement of a reasonable and foreseeable, where again, the amount of additional footprint and material placed on the waste rock facility is just a small fraction of the total amount of waste rock and tailing and other mine rock already existing at the facility. So that's a scenario, again, where this additional material probably, and again, it would require some level of demonstration, wouldn't make a significant change in the estimation of a reasonable foreseeable end date for water treatment. Did that help?
Yeah, I think I'm understanding that you're talking specifically about triggering that end date analysis. But that's the most relevant part towards this.
Yeah, this is speaking to that 3.1.6 that has been in discussion today.
Right. And since today is, all about language, how, I guess, can you point to the language within 3.1.6, somewhere between E and I, that you're specifically talking to with the triggering of the end date and these examples? Because it sounds like that's what you're concerned about is the effort that will require the operators to go through and division staff to go through.
Yes, I would say that's a good assessment. And the other thing I would point out is that the new subsection E that the division drafted, and I have some thoughts on adding to it that I'll share in a moment, but I think that it clearly is not an exemption. I think that's a mischaracterization. It is, if you fall within the description of that subsection, in other words, you're supposed to call that to the division's attention and demonstrate that assertion by substantial evidence. You know, that that legal term substantial evidence is thrown around. It's in the statute. Lawyers love it. You know, it generally means more than a scintilla of evidence, but less than a preponderance. You know, that, what does that tell you? Well, it's another way of looking at it. It's evidence that a reasonable person would accept as adequate to support a conclusion. You know, whereas a preponderance is when you got the scales and it's more than 50%, but sometimes it's a close call, but a reasonable person would say, that's enough to convince me. And so the statute didn't impose the most stringent burden of proof in making the decision that the division and the board would have to make and that the applicant would have to assert. And so the subsection E has I look at it as a data gathering effort and a way to focus the analysis and the discussion for the decision. Now I think, you know, Mr. Parsons and I will probably disagree down the road on whether something requires or doesn't require an end date analysis, as you call it. I like that shorthand term, but I think that E should be viewed as a way of gathering data and focusing the analysis to those instances where the potential impact of a change is minor, is insignificant material. I would submit that those are not ambiguous terms. You see them in statutes all the time. You know, the National Environmental Policy Act, which has been with us since 1969 to do environmental studies, uses the word significant. And so, you know, what does material mean? Material is something that's important, something that's essential or relevant to the question. And so I think that those are not not ambiguous terms and are useful for the analysis and decision-making that will follow. Jim, if you take your slide down, I'd like to show my screen. I'm not an engineer and not technically qualified, and so I'll probably fumble in making this effort here. Are you able to see that screen?
Yes.
Okay. You know, this is kind of summing up and to answer the question that was posed. You know, CMA supports the red lines that the DRMS provided, but in studying that new subsection E, which is on the screen here, and to tie into the screening approach that we asked for in our pre-hearing statement, we think we would like you to consider adding the phrase "or where an amendment may impact the hydrologic balance, but is not likely to have a material effect on water treatment needs and or duration." Then it just goes on to say that you shall submit a statement by substantial evidence for review, and now we would say an approval, because you have to have a decision of something. Now, what this section does not, the way the division drafted it and the way I would suggest you should consider adding some language, is not an exemption. It doesn't say what the answer is going to be to the decision that the division in the first instance will have to make, and the board evidently will have to make. So, but I think it draws the focus in an important way that will help the program as it evolves and matures. So I was kind of a long-winded response to your question. I don't know if that's useful to you. happy to respond again.
No, I appreciate that directing us to the language specifically. That's helpful.
And so I realize this is a kind of an 11th hour proposal, but I think the issues are in front of you. You have the discretion to debate these when you get to your deliberations. You'll have a copy of our slides and everybody else's to look at. And I think that the two examples that Dr. Finley described, one is where the nature of the change is not anticipated to affect hydrologic balance. You know, that's sort of the change the boundary and nothing else kind of thing. And so why should you have to do a big analysis there? And that would be a decision. You'd have to show that in some way, but I think one of the things I wrote a note during the testimony and I wanted to share with the board. I think what I'd like you to understand, if you would, is the anxiety that operators have about this new program. You know, miners are some of the hardest working people I have ever encountered. I grew up on a farm. I'd say farmers probably work harder, but maybe not anymore with their big machines. But miners are just really hardworking people and want to follow the rules, at least the ones I've worked with over the last 30 years. And I think that there's a lot of anxiety about how do I get through this maze to keep my mine operating. You know, I'm meeting water quality standards. My reclamation plan is being complied with. I'm not in any compliance issues, but I need to have a change that keeps the mine going. Got the local tax base, huge. Local employment base, high paid salaries, huge. And so this is a step, and I appreciate the division offering this E up as a discussion point because that took some courage. And I think that this will help focus this debate as we move down the road and show that these kind of examples are relevant in how the division will tackle their analysis and how the applicant is supposed to make a presentation. So with that, I'll close for now and thank you very much for your attention today.
Thank you. Any other questions from the board? Mr. Means, from matter of process, do you have any guidance for us or any timing guidance for where we are right now?
I think we're at a good point in stuff to bring for lunch. And that, so we have a built-in time frame and stuff for lunch with it. So I think it's a good place to start to stop, come back and go into our rebuttals and finish up that process and stuff.
Okay, so it's 11:30 right now. When would you like folks either on Zoom or following along on YouTube to come back and join us again?
I don't know, Mr. Briggs stole my pre-hearing.
And Mr. Sanderson, can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Sure. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
We don't really have a set time and stuff in that, so it's whatever the board's pleasure is and stuff, we are running, we are good time as far as the process for today goes, so if you'd like to take 45 minutes or even an hour, it's up to you.
Do you want to do 45? Is that okay? I think that seems reasonable.
Right.
Okay.
45 minutes.
So 11:30 and come back at 12:15 to the screens, if not a touch. Is that my correct math, right? 12:15, just so that we're up and ready and have everything all set. Any last minute directions there, Cammy?
Nope,
Anyone?
that's perfect. I just need to be able to turn everything off before everybody exits to get lunch.
Okay, you have to turn all the recordings off. Yes. So that's what we need to be doing right now.
Yep, that's what I'm working on. As soon as you close, I can.
Okay,
Please
so
close
we're
it.
going to close for lunch for the moment and turn off the recording and be back here at 12:15.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you.
Which